Speaking of social construction of narratives, speaking of metaphors as analytical devices, and I think even specifically dramatic irony, I honestly thank you so much for your talk, Asim. I kind of invite and welcome everybody to, I don't know, have at this text I'm about to read in terms of that analytical framework you just gave us. Thank you, Tigran, and to the Center for this invitation. I'm Leah Meisterlin. This is Anti-Public Urbanism. I'm going to talk about a very different but very, very similar project case study in Las Vegas, touching on many of the themes and arguments and points that have been made today, this morning, and this afternoon, but less historically minded, unless you want to count 2012 as a historical case, and looking at and thinking about a type of urbanism or a type of urban investment and a sort of excitement about urban design and development, prolific across cities. Right, but once again, found in an extreme manifestation in Las Vegas, which gives us many opportunities to sort of see and unpack what's happening. And hopefully it will become clear why, but I am going to read, which might even keep me under time. In the summer of 2013, in the summer of 2013, I did what many would not attempt in the heat of July. I went to Las Vegas. I had a handful of reasons to be there, and among them was seeing the work in progress of Tony Hsieh's downtown project, which I will often also call DTP. I had heard the plans, the intentions, the investment budget, the vision and its visionary. There we go, there's the budget. The vision and its visionary, the ambition. This is Tony Hsieh, also known as the CEO of Zappos.com. I saw the container park under construction. I walked the perimeter of 9th Bridge, a private preschool and elementary school that boasted they were, quote, now enrolling entrepreneurs and creators, end quote. I walked the length of Fremont Street, comparing it to the Strip, to the acres of sprawl surrounding Vegas, because Vegas does sprawl like only Vegas can do sprawl, and to every mixed-use, walkable, vibrant downtown revitalization plan I had seen before. When night came, I had a couple of drinks at a couple of bars, and I left Vegas intentionally blank. I left Vegas uneasy, unsettled, and uncertain. All right, so what is it? Before I go on, I think I should take a moment to tell you what DTP, or the Downtown Project, is, and where Zappos and Tony Hsieh come into this. And I believe 2010, Zappos was acquired by Amazon, leaving its CEO, Tony Hsieh, a very, very wealthy man. A lot of that personal fortune, roughly $350 million, as you saw, has been invested in a series of entities, the primary two of which are called the Downtown Project and the Vegas Tech Fund, right? $350 million is being invested into the neighborhood just north of the Gateway District. Right, he bought up about 60 acres. There's a lot of real estate in the holdings of these companies, a lot of investment in business incubation. They call it incubation, it's really venture capital. I'll get into that. Part of that deal is that the Vegas Tech Fund or the Downtown Project would invest in your startup, your tech startup, if you agree to relocate to downtown Las Vegas from wherever you are. That was all launched in 2012. Okay, I am rarely unsure about a place. Oh yeah, and most of the, why doesn't it actually look full screen? There's a green, oh, fruit. No, that's not it either. View. Okay. The good news is that whatever is happening on the screens behind me, they're really just like visual footnotes. Everything that I've got to say is going to come out of my mouth. Because really, you can't make this stuff up. Playing SimCity. That's a quote. That is a cited email subject line from Tony Hsieh to the author of this article. All right. I am rarely unsure about a place so seemingly defined and self-assured in its image, right? If we've learned anything about Vegas, a lot of it is about constructed image. I am just as much the project's target demographic as I am sensitive and a little bit vulnerable to urban marketing schemes. My visit should have held interest as a critical exercise and maybe even a little fun. Instead, I found downtown almost impossible to engage for the uninitiated outsider. My clearest read of downtown Las Vegas was that it seemed sure about how it seems. To be clear, skepticism was not my reaction. I was nervous. So full disclosure, those were the opening paragraphs to a review of Tony Hsieh's downtown project plan for Las Vegas that I wrote in 2014, more than a year after that original visit. And now, another 4 years later, I'm actually very grateful for this invitation as a chance to reflect on that essay. And frankly, while it's been published twice, I've never delivered it as a paper. So this is very fun for me. And I'm also, of course, getting the chance to reflect on the urbanism this project models as yet another chance to learn from Las Vegas, right? Like most of what we do, this piece was written in a very particular moment, responding to the sort of moving targets of cities that change. So today, my remarks will move back and forth between then, 2014, and now, and then back again, because that moment for the downtown project, September, October 2014, was important, it was pivotal, and it still offers us much to learn with respect to how we think about investments of technology and innovation, how we think about the alchemy of planned serendipity and techno-economic agglomeration at the neighborhood scale. 3 years into the, back, there we go. Sorry, it's dark, it gets dark, it starts dark. It won't be. 3 years into the endeavor, in the fall of 2014, the project's unfolding story was prompting a line of questions and interrogations into how DTP seems and into the nature of both its assurances and its surety. In late September 2014, DTP, quote, eliminated 30 positions from its corporate staff. And, quote, the layoffs and a series of misreportings in which many sources claimed that the project was eliminating 30% of its staff led to a level of scrutiny new to the public discussion on the project, that in addition to 3 rather high-profile suicides. The layoffs were preceded by an open letter to Tony Hsieh by David Gould, in which he tendered his resignation with charges of, quote, decadence, greed, and missing leadership, end quote. In response to much of the reporting, Tony Hsieh released a statement via the Downtown Project's website with unabashed and defensive sarcasm. Its title literally begins with TLDR, which is internet shorthand for, anybody know? Too long, didn't read. That's how he addressed his response. That statement, this one, includes a link to an Evernote document outlining the DTP activities in which Hsieh is directly involved and those for which he claims absolutely no decision-making capacity or responsibility. This document is titled His Priorities. It is mostly several lists, multiple lists of things he is not involved in and things he serves no decision-making responsibility or capacity for. While Hsieh serves as the project's instigator, champion, figurehead, and underwriter, this list of priorities and the voice in which it is written unquestionably supported Gould's accusation of missing leadership. Okay, so my review, was not a review of the building of or architectural projects beginning to freckle downtown Vegas, nor of the Edward Glazer-inspired plans for additional density, housing, retail, or even of the tech startup activity. Instead, I meandered and macheted my way through the project as an enacted prototype for a general form of urbanism, in search of the kind of city making at the heart of Hsieh's Fremont. Right? It's a haphazard and necessarily belligerent path. There can be no clarity, no elegance, or subtlety in mapping a funhouse, tracing processes that are more Vegas than downtown, more signifier than substance, more affect than effect, more wizard than Oz. I know, right? It's so much fun. Okay. Oh, by the way, all the images I'm showing are their self-presentation, right? This is from their website. I would argue that this is precisely what Las Vegas offers urbanists and why we continue to learn from it. Very little is actually subtle in Sin City. Very complex, nuanced processes are laid bare, or at least more readily graspable, more apparent, right? What happens in Vegas does not stay in Vegas. What happens in Vegas happens everywhere, but here we can see it if we look. Even so, I inferred, there we go, an urban planning approach about which I cannot be sure by its own strategic design. That is to say, there are very few ways to verify. Hacking through crafted public statements and a short catalog of abstract dispatches from the desert, I arrived at indictments more nervous than before. What I found, what I came to understand from the downtown project, was a breed of urbanism that is anti-public by its very nature, and now I'm just giving it away, okay? A version of social space requiring only this semblance of cityness for its sustaining. The image of the downtown project, as it is and as it seems, is the logical end of privatized planning ad absurdum, drawn as the diagram of hubris over the fading erasure of civic responsibility. I will unpack that sentence. The downtown project both is and is not many things. It can be simultaneously analyzed through several separate and often contradictory reinvestment models and frameworks, each simplifying and describing a considerable different set of circumstances within which downtown Las Vegas is still developing. For brevity, I will not go into full detail here, but I am super happy to elaborate if you'd like. For starters, DTP both is and is not a tech-oriented utopia. Often, in the beginning especially, it was described as, quote, an entirely new community, even in a sense, a new city, end quote, where every aspect of life is geared toward entrepreneurship and innovation, end quote. But its plans were noticeably devoid of technological infrastructure investment, and despite being, again, quote, the most ambitious experiment in building a 21st century utopian city in the United States, its planning approaches are all decidedly 20th century. No apps, no sensors, or similarly connected technologies. Turns out the great American techtopia isn't all that smart as far as new cities go these days. It both is and is not a utopia for techies. Both is and is not a project of creative class-oriented planning. While targeting members of the creative class as future residents, the project inverts that standard planning mechanism, incentivizing individuals rather than placemaking as incentive. It both is and is not a new urbanist project, instigated by reverse engineering density goals and predicated on a walkable, mixed-use Main Street model streetscape, an aesthetic, as well as an aesthetic approach calibrating historical reference to cultural association and capitalizing on local architectural illusion, balanced with a very romanticized lifestyle expectation. This one just happens to be hipster Brooklyn. But the project is effectively hermetic. The plans do not, there we go, connect to or transition from the suburbs, the strip, or the desert. Hold on, my next slide will show you. Nor does it follow a particularly principled approach to the formal matters of urban design. There we go. It both is and is not a company town with Zappos at its core. So the pink line is Las Vegas Boulevard. Further south, it's known as the Strip. Up here, not so strip-like. That yellow is just a little bit of that sprawl, but it just really just goes and goes and goes. We've got the Container Park is there. That's the Gold whatever hotel, the Gold Spike. And that is Zappos headquarters, and I'll tell you this fun part about that in a second. Okay, so it both is and is not a company town with Zappos at its core, or perhaps less anachronistically, it's a distributed corporate campus whose very distribution requires description as something other than a campus. It is and is not an updated urban renewal type brainchild of a Robert Moses-like power broker. It is and is not a city-scaled business incubator. It is and is not a venture capital firm. It is and is not a community development corporation. With his early substitution fusion of return on investment with return on community, the downtown project was simultaneous business plan and urban plan. For the record, DTP no longer officially uses the return on community language. Still, its early emphasis or in the sort of goal setting phase of the project is profound. With the goal of reaping ROC, the concept of community is functionally equated with investment, and this community development is understood as an input rather than a result. The organization has since abandoned that phrasing, like I said, offering a rather adolescent explanation for that decision. Quote, in the past, we used the word community a lot more, but we learned that a lot of people misinterpreted or misunderstood our goals. End quote. What is clear from that elaboration is that those who misunderstood were the individuals and organizations who engage in community development activity as its own end, rather than a means toward profit. To be sure, from the outside, the project is puzzlingly contrary to most of our popular urban thinking. Let's call it Schrödinger urbanism. Fremont is simultaneously Wall Street and Main Street. But the downtown project is not generating a type of urbanism that should be relegated to the analytical either or both neither limbo, because it should not be analyzed by the status of the cat, but by the establishment of the thought experiment's fundamental premise, the box. Shea's Las Vegas, like so many large-scale urban projects predicated on private sector funding, well beyond the intentions of public-private partnership. For the record, I'm not critiquing public-private partnership. We are way past that. Is defined by the barrier that prevents one from witnessing the process by which the space of a city is constructed and transformed. Each of the tactics and approaches I described, from new urbanism to smart cities to tech paradise, is defined by its methodologies, regardless of the success or failure of the result. A utopian project need not succeed to be adequately characterized as utopian. This is to say, urbanism is not defined by its ends, but by its means. The downtown project's brand of urbanism is not public. As such, it engages none of the distinctly urban issues resulting from a city's essential publicness, from the negotiations of difference and competing needs, and from a spatial realpolitik. The downtown project as conceived will never, for example, encounter the tragedy of the commons. It lacks meaningfully shared space with shared responsibility. It is not open. It has had no need for the messiness of democratic decision-making. It has replaced the public with massified social self-similarity, hindered effective diversity on a crusade for singular like-minded community. Trust me, I'll get there too. And substituted experiential richness for happiness without conflict. For those of you who don't know, this is the cover of Tony Hsieh's 2010 book, Delivering Happiness, A Path to Profits, Passion, and Purpose. Which spurred a corporate, I'm switching devices now, which spurred a corporate culture movement and subsequent business. In many ways, Delivering Happiness is built upon the Zappos focus on customer service as its basis. When broadened beyond the scope of the sale and delivery of goods, this model maintains a fundamentally transactional definition of that which constitutes happy, whether a happy person, a happy people, or a happy city. Cities are pluralistic, composed of multiple publics and multiple communities. The downtown project's utopia is not a city, it's an enclave. All right, urban pioneer. The early vision for downtown Vegas was not only utopian in its description, it was universal and lofty. Back then, circa 2012, Hsieh described the global challenges of urbanization and posited, I can't believe, we're like the syndrome, the savior syndrome, here we go, and posited that if you fix cities, you kind of fix the world. I know I'm saying it in jest, but this is also very serious because lots of people have been affected by this, and it's a model of development and excitement and investment that is replicated in how many cities, right? Innovation districts are everywhere. Okay, if you fix cities, you kind of fix the world. His proposals for downtown Vegas were presented as strategic, with each intervention contributing to the holistic and integrated revitalization of a city. With this vision of the city he could create, Hsieh headed into the frontier and settled, beginning with, I am not joking, literally and figuratively relocating Zappos into what was once City Hall. The image of the pioneer fearlessly heading into the untamed and unknown, armed with decision, if not experience, is a significant component of the DTP ethos. After all, these are the entrepreneurial techie types. They may not know what they're doing, but they are sure they can figure it out. This group of, quote, novice urban planners cheerfully concede that they have no experience what they're doing. They're simply mapping what they do know, how to build technology companies, onto urban development. There is likely nothing simple about this mapping, and it carries extreme consequences for cities and their inhabitants. Beyond existing models of the relationship between urbanism and labor and beyond the establishment of our consumer society, consider the newfound tendency, just for example, for architects to refer to people as users, a term generally applied to those who unwittingly produce data such that their consumption activities may be targeted. The conflation of urban planning and technology business design suggests a city choreographed by the logic of the push notification. And I'd like to argue here that this sort of entrepreneurial celebration of ignorance is negligent at best and dangerous at worst. Again, insofar as Vegas helps us see what is obscured and subtle elsewhere, here we get much more than a glimpse of the exaltation of the tech industry playing fast and loose with public responsibility. Think Facebook, think Cambridge Analytica. Zach Ware, for example, he's Tony's right-hand man, or it was in 2014, has described their methods as kind of hacky. It's a point of pride. It is the pioneers who take the greatest risks, do the work to learn as they go, and reap the greatest reward. It is the trailblazers who move west. The image of this trailblazing pioneer is revealing and allows for a brief resituating of a few key points often mentioned about the project in 2014: gentrification, risk, leadership, zeal, and dissent. We need people to chop down trees. I'm not going to re-show this, but I'm going to ask you to remember that that's how this quote ends. We need people to chop down trees. First, the DTP decision makers from Tony Hsieh downward almost perfectly exemplify the gentrifying pioneers posited by Neil Smith almost 30 years ago. From the frontiersman attitude of the early settlers to the prerequisite debasement of the existing territory and its inhabitants as wild, uncivilized, and perhaps most importantly, in need of outsiders or others' culture. Let's just recall 20 minutes ago, the description of the Gateway District, right? Smith was writing on inner city gentrification practices observed from the 1960s to the 80s, and while the imposed culture is different, the arrogance and condescension suggest that these novice urban planners, these very proud dilettantes, could have benefited greatly from examining those who have previously attempted similar fixes. This history is too recent to have been forgotten so quickly. Smith's analysis goes on to describe the redifferentiation of urban space by capital through this gentrifying process. When viewed through his lens, the pioneering adventure fantasy rhetoric falls apart, and DTP's projected image seems nothing more than the result of a well-financed Peter Pan syndrome, a crafted delusion of innocence, and a childish game of cowboys and Indians played out in public with real experiences of conquest and casualty. DTP is not an organization of pioneers, and Hsieh is no cowboy. At best, they are the analogy's railroad magnates, facilitating the expansion of the edge into the frontier from the much less risky comfort of their offices. More appropriately, however, they are the banks and insurance companies underwriting the endeavor. Their monetary investment is great, but their gamble pales in comparison to that of the pioneers wagering material and human bets on the outcome. His risk-to-reward ratio is solidly calculated, and Tony Hsieh's investment strategy is neither particularly visionary nor utopian. It is only the latest incarnation of a longer history in urbanism, the financialization of space and of others' risk within that space. Third, this gentrification settlement model only succeeds if others follow. Fiercely loyal and devoted, Hsieh's band of followers, comprising friends, colleagues, employees, supporters, and collaborators, not to mention the throngs of admirers throughout the reaches of the internet, were repeatedly and unfailingly described as a cult. During the fall of 2014, a Google search for the terms Tony Hsieh and cult yielded a little bit more than 80,000 results. At that time, under those same circumstances, I was far more troubled knowing that the combination of Tony Hsieh and Kool-Aid was just as frequent. Yet, Tony Hsieh was not only reluctant to lead, I'm just going to remind you of this again, he seems to outright refuse the responsibility when publicly pressed. Instead, Hsieh and the DTP leadership authorized themselves to make decisions with influence over the whole of a city while declining the accountability concomitant with such authority. And here's where we're going to read, I'm going to quote Las Vegas's mayor. First, early 2014, Las Vegas planning director Flynn Fagg was quoted as saying, quote, "The downtown project does things that are a little unusual sometimes, so we have to try to fit our code around that," end quote, which does call into question the purpose of land use regulation and the role of the public sector and its relationship to private investment, right? He was quoted as saying that to the city's mayor, Carolyn Goodman. Then from Goodman, whenever he needs anything, talking about Hsieh, whenever he needs anything, I'm here. We're just going to go with that. Okay. In the context of an urban strategy dependent on the many who have migrated to Vegas, and in this case, I mean broadly, but also specifically because of this investment, right? This lacking leadership points to a sinister and, again, adolescent application of holacracy onto the city. For the record, holacracy is not a theory of urbanism. It describes a corporate management strategy and, frankly, is more marketing buzzword than management. Without defined roles and leadership, there can be limited accountability. I basically just described holacracy. Holacratic structures are designed to maximize the rate of innovation while maximizing experimentation, unencumbered by the fear of failure or its consequences. In an urban setting, this amounts to an irresponsible disregard for the public effects of possible failures, as well as the inevitable negative externalities generated even by possible successes. Earlier in 2014, Hsieh reorganized Zappos according to the principles of holacracy. Regardless of whether it proves any more effective than any other management structure, make no mistake, it requires a deeply ingrained institutional hierarchy for any chance of success. One that is felt even if not seen, right? Recall, again, Schrodinger's box. Keeping us from seeing the process by which outcomes are reached. The unilateral restructuring of a billion-dollar enterprise towards something that minimizes the appearance of its hierarchy and thus the clarity of accountability requires, on the one hand, the existence of a unilateral decision maker, and on the other, a clear understanding of the pathways for incentivizing credit, even if not blame. This is the logic by which Hsieh restructured the company he leads and the logic applied to the planning of downtown Vegas. I don't know about you, intentionally blank. I don't know about you, but I am deeply troubled by experiments and MBA programs used as substitutes for urban governance and civic mindedness. But these are the models that cities are turning to under the pressures of intercity competition, just as I can pick many pressures. We're gonna use that as a catch-all. The logics of the private sector at expense of publicness, a decidedly anti-public urbanism. The existence of a cult following should not suggest that there are no voices of dissent in downtown Las Vegas. This one's more funny than anything else, because there's a reason for that. In 2014, most of the dissenting voices had come from locals rather than those who moved to Las Vegas to be part of the downtown revitalization, whether receiving direct investment or not. Some were weary of the leadership's inexperience. Many felt pushed aside or out, discarded by gentrification, and several feared the repercussions, because there were very real repercussions. Bullying doesn't begin to describe those stories. Several feared the repercussions of criticizing the project openly, and very few exercised their voice along with their name. Others were uncomfortable with the city's reliance on one man's decision to continue his investment. Upon hearing secondhand that Hsieh was in fact committed to Vegas for the long term, one developer commented, again without his name, quote, "That's nice to know, but maybe you're the only one who knows that. We don't know a thing about what's going on." end quote. And this is the palpable and precarious uncertainty produced by Schrodinger's box of urbanism by private dictate. Walking along Fremont, I felt no active excitement, spontaneity, or curiosity. Oh, this is the quote I wanted in a second. Sorry about that, guys. I felt no active excitement, spontaneity, or curiosity, but rather the growth of a scripted narrative and a correspondingly enforced restraint. Even superficially, the developing streetscape's lively mixture of land use and style, call it maybe the millennial serendipitous aesthetic, betrays a defiantly unmixed agenda for a similarly unmixed audience of users. Unable to inspire confidence in investors outside his circle or empower voices that are not his own, Shea's project cannot lead to a self-sustaining city. In 2014, however, the project was not threatened by its relatively quiet descent. And despite its public setbacks and tragedies, DTP's work is still moving along at a rate far faster than most cities might want to see change. This pace, like the rest of the process, is a product of the visionary's development or developing culture. Ah, that's what happened. It's a double slide. Consider Nellie Bull's description. Quote, the startup movement is isolationist and idealistic, with a sense that entrepreneurs can build their own better communities. The founders need to be in a conducive, unfettered environment to innovate, and most of all, that progress is achievable only by dramatic disruption rather than incremental change. Taken to its logical conclusion, this means building entirely new cities. We know this story. We know the story of an isolationist, individualist, and entrepreneurial movement with a persuasive, if somewhat reluctant, leader attracting talent from various places to an unregulated environment somewhere out west. How many of you figured out where I'm going with this? There's a hint on the screen. We have all read it. Hopefully not. That's way too much for anybody to actually do. But we've heard it, and it turns out there was a movie or a 3-part trilogy. I found that out. This fictional story hypothesizing massively disruptive and intentional change and the building of one new city before a new society so as to fix the world. That novel's pioneer settlement is a prototype, enclave, and refuge until the day its community members decide they can return to the world. But Las Vegas is not fictional, and the complications of public urbanism are both real and undefiable. And this is the point that I go back and forth on whether or not I artificially interrupt the end of this essay so that I can end on the last sentence of the original text or not. I don't think I can do it because I don't have a mic to drop. So I'm going to finish the essay and then I will comment. But Las Vegas is not fictional, and the complications of public urbanism are both real and undefiable. In 2014, I wrote, then, soon, I think, the downtown project will need to consider openness, integration, what was I thinking, and perhaps even a non-digital relationship with the meaningfully public world. Until then, and for the first time, I have an answer to who is John Galt. His name is Tony Shea. Mic drop. Okay. Yeah, I just don't have it in me to actually end on that sentence as much as I wish I could. So instead, I'm going to summarize and finish and wrap things up with that's apparently a still image from part 3 of the Atlas Shrugged movie. This is the Galt's Gulch that they rendered somewhere out west. Right. So, but what happens, it's not so much that what happens in Vegas with respect to innovation districts and tech-oriented planning and the promise of that local economy building, and this mirrors, I hope, or reflects or echoes the earlier comments on in economic development and the dogma of local economic development. So on one hand, I said earlier, right, what happens in Vegas happens elsewhere, but I think really the downtown project is more valuable to us in thinking that what happens elsewhere happens in Vegas, but it often happens bigger and bolder and blunter and brasher and more brazen and with more bravado, right? So we can unpack that series of relationships, negotiations, and power wielding that comes just block by block, lot by lot, parcel by parcel, building by project, right? And Las Vegas here, I think, I'm going to say this as an American. We've been talking a lot about the extent to which it's emblematic of American cities. I agree, is a very American city, and because of its extremities, or its comfort with its extremities, right? It doesn't try to be subtle where others want to sort of cover that up. Vegas often holds up a mirror to for Americans and for American urbanism, and in many ways also global urbanism. And so looking toward DTP right now, and there are many ways we can talk about that mirror and that amplification of American problems that we can find in Las Vegas, but that starts to also get dark. So looking toward DTP right now and thinking about that mirror, right, I want to end on posing a series of questions, or just a couple of thoughts on what happens when we prioritize, when our cities prioritize innovation, which I'm going to operationally define as the act of creating value from process change, not from anything else, in our urbanism, right? What happens when we think through changing our urban processes for the purpose of value creation, or even maybe worse, valuation, right? How we spatialize risk and how that has altered the way we spatialize risk, especially in the wake of the foreclosure crisis in the States. How we think about the relationship between the public and the private, even at neighborhood scales, our extent in sort of our trust in both our cults of celebrity and then our cults of, or our celebrities of tech entrepreneurialism. And then in all of these cases, ultimately, I wanted to ask, if I think about Sidewalk Labs, if I think about Amazon, if I think about Google Fiber, if I think about every small city or mid-sized city or large city trying to incentivize this kind of economic development and building to go along with it, in all of these cases, I wonder what we're really willing to disrupt. Thank you very much.